Okay, you should see my slides.
Yep.
So this says it's for week 5 and 6. It's really for the remainder of the course, 5, 6, 7, and 8. However, there is another assignment that has nothing to do with this subject, and it's the memo. So you just want to make sure you don't forget about that assignment. But for the most part, you can work on your analysis and analysis report for the next 4 weeks. Or actually, is it 5? Yeah, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The analysis report is due on the 19th of July,
Is that the last day?
the last day of the course. All right, so
Do you know what week the memo's in?
I think that's the same week.
Okay.
Yeah, it's due the same week. The memo is pretty short. It should be no longer than 2 pages. It's supposed to be a concise business memo, so it's really not a huge assignment. You just have to be able to craft it in a way where you're talking about data and bringing in some of the concepts from the course and applying them to a real world scenario, like your workplace, for example.
Okay.
Okay, so week 5 content, we're talking about the performance analyses and a needs assessments. I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. It's the same process for each. The difference is a needs assessment is, in my mind, a broader look at a problem. It's perhaps if you're in a business and you're say you don't really know where you need to kind of put your resources, you might conduct a needs assessment to see where those resources are best placed. A performance analysis is a little more specific to a problem. It might be kind of focused in on that the reports for maintenance on a certain system are not being accurately completed, and so you want to see why that is. So you're kind of looking real specific at a workplace problem, and so that's the difference between an analysis and assessment in this course. When to use them? You can use this process in a lot of different contexts. As you can imagine, with the two different terms, two different perspectives, maybe one at 1,000 feet, looking down, and one at 10,000 feet looking down, where you're getting a lot broader perspective with the needs assessment. So you can imagine you can use these if you have one person that's not doing a job correctly, you could do a performance analysis, find out why. Or you can do it if you have an entire organization that's not meeting certain goals in an area. You can conduct a needs assessment and look at the entire organization in that area. If you look at it in a very broad sense at the organizational level, I would call that a strategic needs assessment, because now you're looking at pretty much your strategic goals, like what's really important to the organization. And you're going to have a strategic planning course, strategic assessment course in this leadership program. So it's a nice segue to that. And there's certainly other analyses that you can do at the strategic level. But I would say that this process that we're learning here is very helpful and very powerful to use when you're trying to focus on your strategic issues. So you can use it in a lot of different cases. And how to use it, that's what this whole course is about, the next 4 weeks. We're going to go over that in detail. And then finally, this is the signature assignment for this course. It's the main signature assignment. There is another one, which is a short memo that you'll write that's more of a synthesis of what you've learned at the entire course. So you got the memo that's a synthesis of the entire course, and you've got this signature assignment, the needs assessment, which basically is the larger of the two signature assignments that you ought to put in your portfolio once you complete it. What are performance analyses and needs assessments? Essentially, it's a gap analysis followed by a cause analysis. These terms are used by different authors, different professors, different places. Roger Kaufman is a professor at Florida State University, and he also teaches at Sonora Institute in Mexico. And he writes a lot about needs assessments. Roger Chevalier was out here in Rohnert Park until he passed away about 3 years ago. And he was a consultant. He taught at Sonoma State for their business department at the adjunct level. But he was mostly a consultant and author, and did a lot of work with different international organizations, and including the International Nuclear Organization. So if they can use this process for nuclear issues, how to keep the world safe from the threat of an accident like Chernobyl or something like that, then they think that you could certainly use these processes at other levels. Already talked about the strategic level, strategic needs assessment. That's what the Coast Guard would call this process in their standard operating procedures, is a strategic needs assessment. And that's where I got exposed to it, as well as in my graduate studies at San Diego State University with a woman named Allison Rossett, who was also a big proponent of the performance analysis process, and also a consultant and an author. Let's see what else. We'll be mostly using Roger Chevalier's. I like the way Roger has written about this process in his book that we have for the course. Roger said he really wrote that for first line managers, supervisors, so that they could understand these processes and kind of put them to use themselves. he was a big proponent of getting managers to think like this, so that the process could be more. It would be used throughout, throughout the workplace, and the different organizations. As it is, I think you're going to find mostly consultants that use this, that are either training consultants or performance consultants, uh, and perhaps those consultants could be internal or external to an organization. Companies like PG&E have internal consultants, the Coast Guard, the Navy. Um, there's a ton of organizations, Gore-Tex. If you wanted to find out more who's using this, if you went to the International Society for Performance Improvement, it's a mouthful, but ISPI, you can see who their memberships are from different organizations, and you could be confident that those organizations are using this process to make their businesses better. But Roger's done a lot of work making this understandable for most people and usable. And he's also added some really unique pieces to the process, which we'll get into in this presentation. You don't have to have his book to do this part of the course, but it's helpful to be able to refer to it, because I do have other papers from Rogers, and I've got his video from the ISBI conference. He was a regular presenter on this topic at ISBI. He did a workshop before the conference started for people, so a lot of people learn this process from Roger. Yeah. So this process is a systematic process. That means you can follow it and replicate it, and hopefully come up with the same or very similar results each time. Also, by being systematic, it kind of helps you not miss a blind spot in your understanding or your perspective. If you follow a systematic process, think of it as a recipe. If you just follow the recipe, your bread or whatever you're making is going to come out a lot better than if you just wing it. It's ideally suited for operational or tactical activities. This is below the strategic level, but it can also be used at this strategic level as well. Here's the process in a flow chart. So you got your gap analysis on the left up here, and then that feeds into your cause. And one thing that Roger added is Roger Chevalier is the force field analysis. And then you would, from there, you would design and develop a solution system. Like how or what would you use to close the gaps? The way you're going to close the gaps is address the causes. So you can see how those two are related. The ones in the gray here are areas that we're not going to cover in the course, but these would be part of the process. You would implement your intervention system, your solutions, and then you would evaluate the success of or lack of success of your solution. And then, from that evaluation, you could actually go right back up into intervention selection, or even one of the analysis phases. So you could actually see this, it could work as a as a cycle. When you're looking at the gap, this is a good visual representation of what what you should be thinking about. Your desired level and your current level, and the distance between. That's your performance gap. A lot of times, you're not going to be able to reach the desired level. It's just a bridge too far. So, what you want to have is a reasonable goal, something that you can reach in 3 to 5 years at the very latest. It could be a lot sooner than that as well, but you don't want to have you don't want to kind of base your entire analysis on a goal that is going to take you 10 or 20 years to attain, because the world changes so much, the workplace changes so much, and that time, all the analysis work that you've done might not be relevant, 5, 10 years from now. So for that reason, you want to pick that reasonable goal, go after that goal with the data that you collected, and then you would reassess it, or you would do another analysis, replicate the process 3 to 5 years out, or right after you reach that goal, and you can make another leap towards that desired performance until you actually reach it. Another thing that Roger Chevalier added to the process was this idea of a trend analysis. As we know from the first part of the course, you can't really implement an intervention and then assume that just because after the point of intervention, the point of your solution, you see the change that you want or the change you don't want, but you can't assume that whatever change it is a result of your solution or your intervention, because you just don't know what was happening before, right? Unless you look at what happened before. So what we want to do is try to find out what the trend was with whatever you're looking at. So if you're looking at, say you're looking at workplace absences and tardies, or being late to work and missing work at an organization. If you don't look at how for your gap analysis, you're going to have the data on the current state. So you're going to say, okay, well, people are missing on average 1 day every 2 weeks. That's the average. But if you don't look at, say you're looking at this in April, if you don't look at least a whole year of absentee and late data, late to work data, then you don't know if this is a number that fluctuates from month to month. When you get to the summer months, maybe the absentee rate goes up. So say you did do that analysis in April, say you implemented your solutions in May, and then all of a sudden you saw, wow, my solutions didn't help. It didn't change anything. We still have people missing one day every couple weeks. So you just assume that it didn't work. But if you had trend data, perhaps you'd look at the previous years and you'd say, well, in May, June, July, we see an uptick in the amount of absentees at work, because maybe summer gets to people. They want to go out and play a little bit more. So by knowing that, and you could say, well, say it doubles in the month of May usually, and the year that you implemented your solution, it stayed level. Now we know that your intervention probably did have an effect. It probably did help, because the previous years you would be up double from what you're at in terms of absentees. So that's why you want to look at trend data. You want to look to see what has happened in the past, and um, everything has history, right? So you want to take the history into account of the data that you're looking at. The cause analysis is really, I'd say, the um, maybe the most important area of the analyses, because that's going to tell you exactly where you should focus your interventions. Gap analysis is sometimes really easy to get. You what's your desired performance, what's your current performance. It's an easy thing to probably capture, especially if you're looking at something that already has some data on it. The cause analysis, however, gets into what are the environmental and what are the individual aspects of the of that are causing that gap. And so we have the individual ones on the bottom. Those are skills, knowledge, capacity, and motives. We have the environmental ones on the top: information, resource, and incentives. So by taking all these into account, you're getting a comprehensive perspective on the causes. You know, what are the causes for that gap? If you cover all 6 boxes, you're going to cover hopefully every area of the problem, and so that's why we use these 6 boxes. One thing to keep in mind is that typically 85% of the causes are in the environment, not the individual. We like to blame individuals a lot of times, except for ourselves. When it's ourselves, we like to blame the environment. But a lot of times when we have performance problems, we like to kind of focus in on the workers or the individuals. Take um, teenagers not doing something they're supposed to do. A lot of times we just say, you know, why doesn't Johnny just do what he needs to do, you know, and how come he's not doing his chores, or how come he's not doing his homework, or whatever it is. Um, and a lot of times we can fix that problem in the environment without even sending Johnny to a psychologist to find out if he has the capacity or the motives to do the homework or the chores, or getting him a tutor to find out if he has the right knowledge to do these things. A lot of times, if we just focus in on that environment and make sure, does he have the information? Information is different than knowledge. Information would be, I'm looking for a piece of paper to pick up, but it would be included in the environment, and manuals, procedure guides, assignment instructions, whatever it is, that would be considered information instead of knowledge. Right? Knowledge is what's up here. Information is what you would be given by a supervisor, by your workplace, by your teacher, whatever it is. Um, and then resources are going to be the tools and computer, whatever it is to get your job done. Does Johnny have the books that he needs? Does he have uh, pencils to write with, erasers? Does he have good paper, an area to sit at and complete his work with good lighting? All the things that a person would need to do homework. Those are the resources, and then incentives, of course. Johnny needs incentives to do his homework. So that might be, hey, you're not going to be on your phone or your video games until you complete your homework each day. That's an incentive. You got to build those into the system, right? So you can see how a problem like that is really in the environment and not in the individual. 15% of the time it's in the individual. They've done a lot of studies on this, and they've kind of validated that the split here, the 85 to 15. The Coast Guard has been doing analyses for over a decade, couple decades probably, and they did a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis when you look at all the analyses, and they looked at this issue, the 85-15, and they basically came up with the same numbers. So based on all their analyses, 85% of the problems could be solved by just addressing the environment. When you're doing a cause analysis, there's two kinds of questions to ask. There's open-ended questions and there's direct questions. And they're both included in what we would call probing questions. So you want to start with an open-ended question. An open-ended question for information would sound something like this. How are your performance expectations communicated to your employees? The word how kind of leaves it open-ended, right? This is designed to get the person answering the question to start thinking about the area that we're talking about, the area of performance. How the area is in this case what, Marie? Can you figure that out? But you're on mute. Let's see.
There I am. And now I can't see what I'm doing.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot with a. So we're looking at that first question.
Okay, I found this questions. Open-ended exploratory questions. How are performance expectations communicated to employees?
So what is the area we're looking at under information?
Oh,
and it's in the question.
it's I'm not quite sure what we're referring back to the grid of all the.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily, because the grid just gets to the information level, right? Kind of the high level. But within information, now you haven't had any of this in the course so far, but I'm just asking you to read the question and think about what are they asking there? What is the area that they're asking?
Oh, they're asking about communication.
They're asking about communication, but what else?
And expectations.
Expectations. Are expectations important for workers?
Yeah, they can't meet an expectation that they don't know exists.
Exactly. So this is very important to have very clear expectations, right? And a lot of times, a lot of workplaces, they just haven't communicated those effectively. So that first question gets the person to start thinking about it. How are they communicated? How are the expectations communicated? And then a lot of people would leave it there, right? They would ask the question, and then the person being interviewed would say, well, we have an orientation, and employees are given they're told exactly what the expectations are, and it's in the manual. Um, and they would leave it at that. And then the consultant might write that down. Orientation, manual. But it's important to follow up the open-ended part with some direct questions, because these direct questions are very specific um, to important areas. And um, a lot of times, um, when the person being interviewed is not able to really think specifically about the different areas until they're given the direct question. So the direct questions might be, have the expectations been communicated to employees? Yes. Okay. So these are yes or no questions. The difference between open-ended and direct can be answered yes or no. So on your data collection sheet, you might just have a checkbox, yes or no, for these ones. Do employees understand the various aspects of the rules and the priorities we're doing them? So this gets them to think, okay, um, about roles and priorities for doing them. Okay, I guess I haven't really told my employees that I really want them to treat customers with the utmost respect. That's my main priority, So they know it's important, but when it comes down to um, using say it's a restaurant, when it comes down to using the ingredients frugally and not wasting them, I've told them that that's a priority, but I've also told them that customers are priority. So what happens when the customer asks for a new sandwich because they didn't like the other one? Are they going to make it, or are they going to be frugal about the ingredients? So that's where you have to have the priorities laid out for them, right? Priority is the customer. Keep them happy. Keep them coming back. So make that sandwich over for them if you need to. Are there clear and relevant performance aids to guide them to guide the employees? Is there a guide for how to make that sandwich somewhere? What you know, how much mayonnaise to put on, how much mustard, how much meat and cheese. A lot of people like meat and cheese in their sandwich. If you're only putting a little bit, maybe they're getting upset. So there should be a guide to make that perfect sandwich, right? I think I've been told that McDonald's is really good, or Starbucks are really good at providing consistent results in their meals, because they have very clear guides. Plus, a lot of the environment has been constructed to make consistent um, performance at a certain level very easy for the organization to reach. They're given the resources, they're given the tools, they're given the guidance in this case. So you see how these probing questions can kind of get really down to um, the more granular level of the information. The first open-ended question provides an opportunity to bring for the person that you're interviewing to bring in something you haven't asked about, or you're not going to ask about. It starts their thinking in the area. But then the direct follow-up questions really hammer down the points of what should be done in the workplace in terms of information. And you're going to have these questions for resources, incentives. So those three together are the environment, and the next three, motives. How are motives different than incentives? This is a good question that comes up in this class. Motives are within the individual. Incentives can produce motives, but they're different. You can address incentives in the environment. Um, it's really hard to change someone's motives if if they're not the right fit. So a lot of times motives needs to be addressed when you're hiring a person. Same thing with the next one, capacity. Capacity is your ability to learn things. Do you have the strength, the dexterity to do the job? Have you seen those job announcements, descriptions where it says, got to be able to lift 50 pounds or 30 pounds or something like that? That's one of these, capacity. Like the workplace, they need you to be able to have a certain capacity of strength to do this job. If you can't, it's this is when it's better to basically figure it out at the very beginning of the hiring process, because it's really hard to change a person's capacity for something, um, especially something like strength or something like that. You could see how it's in our society we're not set up to really address those issues with employees. Um, you can offer them fitness plans, you can give them time off to work out or whatever it is, but beyond that, it's really hard. Um, and then finally, skills and knowledge. Skills and knowledge is one area where we can um, change an employee's levels. We can give them the skills and knowledge to do the job. Um, However, you can also hire them with a certain level of skills and knowledge. Um, the difference between skills and knowledge and capacity is uh, skills and knowledge are are areas where we can grow. There's a thing called a growth mindset, right? You're not some people might say, well, I'm just bad at math, I can't really work on the cash register. Hmm. We can train you that. We can train you to do that. We can give you the skills, the knowledge that you need to actually be on the cash register. Um, a lot of people can grow in that area. Now, some people might be constrained by their capacity in that area, but in general, humans can grow and learn how to do the math needed. When you get done with the cause analysis, you're going to do what's called a force field analysis. This is another one of Roger Chevalier's um, uh, contributions to this process. He said, once we do the cause analysis, we should take each cause and we should figure out how much force that cause is having on the problem. And that force could be good or could be bad. Now, um, it I probably misspoke by saying this is on the causes, but instead of thinking about the causes, think about the questions that we asked. So you might, if you just take the one that we looked at earlier on expectations. So now you ask questions about expectations. It may or may not be a cause. So, but you would have a force there. If the expectations say they're really clear in the workplace, like this, whatever you're looking at, expectations is you asked all the questions, and it's obviously not one of the problem areas. So that would have a green arrow. So it's not a cause, but it's a cause. It's an area that you looked at, and it's actually an area where the organization is doing really well. So it would have a green driving force arrow, and it might not have any red arrow. But if there was, say, one area for improvement within expectations, you might have an arrow that looks like or an area that looks like um, the middle force there. It has a long green arrow and a short red arrow. And so they're kind of working against each other, but you can see that the driving force is a greater force that's working on that particular area of expectations. Does that make sense? Does this?
Yeah, I was having trouble understanding these arrows when I was looking at them yesterday. They're subjective, right? There's not an actual.
Yeah, it's subjective based on
your conversation.
It's based on data, but it's based on qualitative data, right? Because you ask all those questions, and then you're kind of condensing that or reducing that down to, okay, well, what do the arrows look like for this?
Seems like they have really great communication, but there's maybe a gap if they have arrows.
Yeah, and the idea is to kind of give you a visual of where your real problem areas are, and those are going to be the ones with the -4 restraining force, right? The greater the number in terms of its distance from zero is going to be the stronger the force. If you have just a -1 arrow, that's telling you that that force is not very strong. Or if you have a +1 arrow, it's not very strong. But if you get up to the 4s, then you have a pretty strong force there. That's going to be turned vertically on one of the forms that Roger has developed. So it'll look like this. So now you see that area, clear expectations that we looked at right there, the first one under information, and you'll be able to draw in based on the questions that you asked, the forces there. And you'll do that for each of the 6 boxes and each of the sub areas that we have questions. Roger has already designed the questions for us. We just probably have to tweak them a bit to apply to our workplace. So here's how it'll look on the actual worksheet. You would, on this worksheet, you would just put under the column on the left, you're going to put kind of the general area that you're looking at. So this would be, you're looking there at incentives, and then you got 3 sub areas under incentives: financial, and then you got kind of your job and fulfilling as a second one, and then 3 kind of, is the environment positive or negative? What kind of environment are you working in terms of the culture? So those are the 3 under incentives, and then you would basically kind of put the arrows on how they're working there. So which one under incentives, which one is the strongest force?
The financial and non-financial incentive.
Yeah. And is it a good force or a bad force? Is it working?
Restraining force.
Is it creating the problem, or is it fixing the problem?
Creating.
What's that?
Creating the problem.
Yeah, it's creating, because it's a restraining force. It's restraining the performance that we want to see. Really. When you're developing your interventions, when you finally have all your data laid out like this, and you see the big arrows that you want to address on the right side, the restraining forces, you want to create, kind of brainstorm and create a list of possible interventions. And then you want to assess, and this is all done kind of behind the scenes by the analyst or the consultant. You want to assess the likely effectiveness of these potential interventions. If financial incentives is one of the areas that is really lacking, and you don't have any authority to offer those incentives, you're probably going to have to skip that incentive, right? There's probably nothing you can do in that area. If you work for a big bureaucracy, the state government or federal government or something like that, you're not going to be able to really do too much at the worker level to address that, or at the work, a certain site level, school, for example. So that's going to be something that you'll probably leave on the table. You're not going to really be able to address it. However, you could put it in your report and you can pass it up to the organization. It could be used in perhaps some salary negotiations or something like that. But you'll assess that all behind the scenes. Where can I get the biggest bang for my buck? And then and we talked about at one of the meetings that we had last week, I believe, we talked about that there might be some residual effect if you have a intervention that's designed to increase skills and knowledge. That could affect their motivation, right? So it could affect another area, another cause, for example. So you want to make sure you think about that and how each of those interventions is going to affect the other causes, or how you think they will. So there's a little bit of art to this, where you're basically a little bit of subjective art, where you're having to say, what's the likelihood of this intervention affecting these different areas. That art can be kind of fine-tuned by doing research in the area. Find out if sending people to training, if it affects their motivation on the job. That's probably an area where you can research a little bit and find out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and when does the training affect the motivation? When the training is probably going to be helpful to the employee. I think you could probably assume, or that it's probably likely to increase their motivation as well. And it can have the opposite effect too. If you send somebody to training that has nothing to do with making them a better employee or helping them do their job, that might really kind of wear on their motivation to do the job. And then you're going to prioritize your interventions, because you might not be able to do all of them. So this is, an area where you'll really spend some time thinking about these things. And you might talk to leadership to, once you have a list of possible solutions, and kind of leave it to them. Say, hey, these are the solutions I came up with. I know we can't do all of them, but these are the ones I think need to be done. What is your perspective, or which ones would you like to focus on? And then you get their buy-in, right? They say, well, we really need to do this training. So I'd like to see training as part of the solution. And then you say, oh, okay, we'll make sure we put that in there. And by doing that, you're getting their buy-in and their support for whatever you come up with. And the opposite, you're less likely to have your solution system scuttled or changed or stopped by the leadership by getting their buy-in in advance. When you have your solutions, it kind of look like this. Those environmental factors are going to be out on the end of the lever there, so they're going to exert more force on the problem. That last arrow is information, so that's going to have the greatest effect. And that's just based on the 85-15 rule. 85% of the time, those other environmental areas are going to have more effect on the performance. When you get to writing your report, here's just some information about it. It's a large part of the grade because it is a signature assignment, 30%, and then the due date. Here's the outline for the report. And this slide shows on week 5, so you can just go back and take a look at that. Some questions to ask yourself as you're finishing your report. These you might read before you even start your analysis too, to make sure you're on the right track. And that's pretty much it. Any questions about this?
So you're going into this analysis with a problem in mind. You're not finding the problem because of this analysis.
Correct. Could be a problem or an opportunity. An opportunity would be maybe more of a needs assessment where they really don't know where they're going to focus. So they want to just kind of look at where's our opportunities to improve.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.